I still remember the exact second my life split into a before and an after. The tent was silent except for the constant hum of the generator outside, a low mechanical growl that made sleep almost impossible. I had just finished a 12-hour patrol shift under the blistering desert sun. Sand was still in my teeth, in my boots, in every crease of my uniform. My body was exhausted, but my mind refused to rest. When I logged into the small military laptop to check my messages, I wasn't expecting much. Usually just spam from headquarters, updates from command, or the occasional letter from my sister. But that night at exactly 02:13, one subject line froze me in place. "We need to talk." It was from my wife Emma. My pulse quickened. I hadn't heard from her in weeks. Every time I'd sent her an email, she'd replied with short, clipped answers. I told myself she was just busy. Our marriage had survived other deployments before. We had plans, dreams, a little house with a garden, maybe children someday. At least that's what I thought. I opened the email. The words didn't even look real. "Simon, I'm filing for divorce. I can't keep waiting for you. It's over between us. By the time you read this, I've already moved on. Don't bother calling." I scrolled down. It got worse. "I've emptied the joint account. I need the money to rebuild my life. And one more thing, please don't come back to the house. It's not yours anymore. I'm living there now with someone else. His name is Ryan. He's been good to me in ways you never were." I just stared at the screen. I could feel my chest tighten like someone had pressed a steel plate against my ribs. The desert heat had been brutal all day, but now I felt cold. Most men in my position would have smashed something, maybe thrown the laptop, cursed her name, broken down crying in the sand, but I didn't. I sat there in silence for a long time, just letting the words burn themselves into my memory. And then slowly, a strange calm settled over me. I thought about how Emma had always underestimated me. She thought I was simple, predictable, a soldier who followed orders, nothing more. She never understood that silence doesn't mean weakness, that composure doesn't mean surrender. I clicked reply. I typed one word. Understood. Then I pressed send. The days that followed blurred together in routine patrols and endless desert skis. But inside my head, everything had shifted. Every bullet I loaded, every report I filed, every grain of sand under my boots, it all seemed insignificant compared to the storm forming inside me. When the guys in my unit noticed I was quieter than usual, they didn't ask questions. Soldiers don't pry. They saw the way I cleaned my rifle with mechanical precision, how I volunteered for extra watch shifts just to stay awake, how my eyes no longer drifted toward pictures of Emma pinned to my cot. They didn't know I had deleted those pictures the moment I read her email. They didn't know I had already started planning. Emma thought she had won. She thought she had stripped me of everything: money, home, love, but she forgot one crucial thing: I am patient. And patience in the hands of someone who has nothing left to lose can be a weapon sharper than any blade. I began to replay every conversation we'd ever had. Every careless comment, every complaint about finances, every little detail about her habits. I realized she had been planting seeds for months, maybe even years. The sudden new boyfriend wasn't sudden at all. He'd probably been around long before I left for deployment. That thought should have crushed me. Instead, it lit a fire inside me. On patrol, when the sun boiled the horizon and sweat soaked my uniform, I wasn't thinking about the enemy. I was thinking about her smug face when she clicked send on that email. I imagined her laughing with Ryan inside my house, drinking from my glasses, sleeping in my bed. And then slowly I smiled, because I knew something she didn't. She thought the money she took was all we had. She didn't realize I'd been saving separately for years. A deployment bonus here, hazard pay there, investments tucked away where she could never find them. Emma had always rolled her eyes when I talked about long-term security. She wanted quick thrills, flashy vacations, shiny jewelry. I wanted stability. And now that stability was mine alone. She thought the house was hers, but she hadn't read the fine print on the deed. She thought she had ended my life, but really she had just handed me a clean slate. Weeks later, as my deployment wound down, I received my orders. I'd be shipped home in less than a month. My brothers in arms celebrated the news with cheers, laughter, and cigarettes. I just sat quietly, polishing my boots, my mind already 1,000 miles away. Because for me, home no longer meant comfort, it meant a battlefield. Not the kind with rifles and Humvees. The kind fought with silence, patience, and devastating precision. The night before we left the desert, I couldn't sleep. I lay on my cot staring at the ceiling, listening to the generator hum. I imagined Emma opening her laptop again, expecting silence from me, maybe even desperation. Instead, she'd find nothing. No angry emails, no begging, just that one word, understood. It was the calm before the storm. And she had no idea it was coming. When the plane touched down back in the States, the air felt thick with possibility. Families waved banners and cried tears of joy as soldiers rushed into their arms. I watched them reunite, then slipped quietly out of the crowd. There was no one waiting for me, and that was exactly how I wanted it. I rented a car, drove for hours, stopped only once at a gas station where I bought a cheap pair of sunglasses and stared at myself in the cracked bathroom mirror. My face looked older, harder, but my eyes burned with purpose. Finally, I pulled up near the house, my house. From the street, it looked the same: the white fence I had painted myself, the porch where Emma once kissed me goodbye, the oak tree out front. But it wasn't mine anymore, at least not to her. Through the window, I saw shadows moving inside, laughter, 2 glasses of wine on the table, a man's jacket slung carelessly over the chair. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Then slowly I smiled again. Because Emma thought she was living in victory. But in reality, she was standing on a battlefield she didn't even recognize. And I was already winning. When I left the car that night, I didn't storm up to the door. I didn't knock. I didn't shout Emma's name like some wounded animal. No, that would have given her the satisfaction of seeing me broken. Instead, I drove past the house and kept going, disappearing into the night like a shadow. Because revenge isn't taken in a single blow, it's built brick by brick, layer by layer, until the weight of it is so heavy that the person you're targeting collapses under it. And Emma, she wouldn't even realize the walls were closing in until it was too late. The first step was information, always information. Emma believed I was just a soldier, a man who could follow orders but not think ahead. She forgot that war had taught me patience, taught me to observe, taught me to survive by reading every detail. And now I was going to use those skills on her. I started with the bank. She thought she had emptied the joint account. True, but she hadn't touched the accounts I had built separately. A quiet savings portfolio under my name only, a deployment fund, a modest stock portfolio, even a hidden military savings plan she'd never cared to ask about. Altogether, it wasn't millions, but it was enough to fund what I needed, enough to fight. I contacted a lawyer, not a loud, flashy one like Emma would expect, but a quiet professional who specialized in financial law. I paid him in cash. I gave him only what he needed to know. She took everything from me. I want to know what I can take back. He looked through the paperwork, then raised his eyebrows. The house isn't hers, it's yours. Her name isn't on the deed, not legally. That was the first domino. I walked out of that office with a calm so sharp it felt dangerous. Emma thought she had claimed my house for her new life with Ryan, but legally, every night she spent there, every glass of wine she drank, every laugh she shared in those walls, she was trespassing. And she had no idea. The second step was watching. I didn't confront her. Instead, I rented a small apartment 2 towns over, nothing more than a mattress and 4 walls. From there, I drove into my old neighborhood at odd hours, always careful, always unseen. I watched the house from a distance, memorized the new routines. Emma and Ryan weren't careful. They lived like the world was theirs. They went out for dinner, came back late, left lights on, left doors unlocked. Sometimes I saw Emma through the window, her hair tied up the way she used to when she cleaned the kitchen. Only now she was laughing with him. It didn't hurt the way I thought it would, it fueled me. Every detail I observed went into a notebook: what time they left, what time they returned, how long they stayed out, who visited, how often deliveries came. I wasn't just watching them, I was studying them. Because if war taught me anything, it's that knowing your enemy's routine is the first step to controlling them. The third step was patience. Weeks passed, I didn't make a move, not yet. Emma probably thought I was overseas still, licking my wounds, broken. She had no idea I was back, that I had already seen her laughing in my kitchen. But revenge tastes better when it's slow, when it seeps into every corner of your enemy's life until they can't breathe without feeling its weight. And I had all the time in the world. It was Ryan who gave me the opening. One night I watched as he staggered out of the house, clearly drunk, keys jingling in his hand. He got into his car, backed out of the driveway too fast, and sped off down the road. I followed at a distance. He didn't get far. At a gas station on the edge of town, he stumbled out, bought more beer, and then drove recklessly back toward the house. I didn't intervene. I didn't call the cops. Not yet. But I wrote it all down. Because evidence is power. And soon I'd have more than enough. The turning point came on a Wednesday morning. Emma left for work. Yes, she still had the same office job at the insurance firm, and Ryan stayed behind. Around noon, a woman pulled up in a red car, young, blonde, too comfortable as she walked up the porch steps. Ryan opened the door shirtless. He kissed her before she even crossed the threshold. I watched. I wrote. Emma thought she had traded me in for a better man, but the better man was already cheating on her. That was when the shape of my revenge began to form, not loud, not violent, but clean, surgical, a strike that would cut deeper than any bullet. I wasn't just going to take back what was mine. I was going to make her world collapse around her, piece by piece, until she had nothing left. That night I finally made contact. I waited until late when I knew she'd be alone. I called her, blocked number. She answered on the second ring, her voice sharp. Who is this? I let the silence hang for just a moment, then I spoke, calm and steady. Emma, it's me. There was a pause. I could hear her breath catch, then bitterness. Simon, where are you? Closer than you think. Her tone shifted instantly to anger. Don't play games. You got my email. You know it's over. Move on. I almost laughed. Oh, I got your email and I understand, truly, but Emma, you forgot something. She hesitated. What? The house, it's mine, always was, legally. Every night you've spent there, you've been trespassing. For the first time, her voice cracked. You're lying. Emma, check the deed. Silence. I could almost hear her pulse racing through the phone. I'll give you time, I continued, my voice calm, almost gentle. Time to pack, time to say goodbye, but Emma, when I come back to claim what's mine, you'd better not be standing in my way. I hung up. I knew she wouldn't leave immediately. Pride wouldn't let her. She'd convince herself I was bluffing, that I was just trying to scare her. That was good, because the longer she stayed, the deeper the trap closed. Ryan was cheating, her money was gone, and now the roof over her head wasn't hers. Piece by piece, the walls were closing in. And she still had no idea just how far I was willing to go. Because this wasn't about anger anymore. This was about control. And for the first time in years, I had it. That night, I sat in my apartment, staring at the notebook filled with their secrets, their routines, their mistakes. I ran my finger down the list of times, dates, details. This wasn't just a record. It was a weapon. And I was ready to use it. Because when Emma finally realized what I had done, it would already be too late. When you sit on a plan for weeks, letting it breathe and settle, the final act feels almost like the natural next breath. I had spent months collecting pieces, a quiet, methodical collage of truth that would fit together perfectly when the time came. I thought of it like assembling a rifle in the dark. Each part must be exact, placed in the right order, or the whole thing fails. I had no margin for error. The day I moved to finish it felt ordinary. Gray light through the cheap blinds of my rented apartment, the kettle humming on the stove. I packed a single bag not because I was leaving for good, but because I wanted something portable to hold the things I might need in a chaotic hour. A few documents in a folder, a change of shirt, my service ID. Simple things. The real work didn't live in physical baggage. It lived inside pockets of paper, on thumb drives, in sealed emails, in the slow drip of formal requests sent to banks, to regulators, to a quiet list of people whose silence had once been profitable. It began as I'd planned before dawn. First, the legal strike. I had a quiet morning meeting with the lawyer I'd hired, the one who smelled faintly of old tobacco and knew how to make courts move like a well-oiled machine. We filed a motion for immediate possession and an injunction to prevent Emma from disposing of any property pending the court's review. There was paper stacks of it tracing the deeds, confirming that the house title had never been legally transferred to her name. She had signed nothing. She had assumed. She had acted as if a social media post morphs law. The clerk stamped the documents as if the ink were a bell. Next, the financial net. James, the compliance man I'd worked with back home before enlisting, executed the part I couldn't handle from a distance. He coordinated with banks where the suspicious transfers had landed. He moved formal requests for account freezes for tracing of Ryan's recent deposits for audits. The small portfolio I'd quietly built years ago was untouched. I had the access, the proof, the leverage to secure immediate temporary sequestering of assets suspected to be proceeds of wrongful action. The freeze would not itself ruin them, but it would make breathing hard. Meanwhile, Marla, the journalist who had a sense for smellable lies, agreed to sympathetic but surgical timing. She would publish nothing reckless, only what the date approved, but when it hit, it would be framed as an inquiry begging for answers. The story was built like a blade inside a ribbon of human interest. Local family disruption raises questions about property and ethics, read the working headline. She promised to hold until the court had given us momentum. I had more edges to my plan. Evidence of Ryan's reckless behavior, the DUI, the late-night driving, the bar fights, had been collected over months. I kept record of deliveries that matched Ryan's purchases and small business registrations that led back to a shell contractor that billed Emma's supposed remodel into the joint account. I had calls recorded with my block number where Ryan boasted of how fast he'd flipped a stolen appliance. None of it was elegant, all of it was useful. When everything was in place, I drove back down the old road as if I were a man returning home after a long vacation. My heart beat not with anxiety but with a strange, precise calm. The house looked ordinary from the outside, sun-bleached siding, a garden gone spraggle. The oak that had shaded our porch when we were young still held the same scratch my hand left when I first learned to carve. Inside, laughter echoed. Emma and Ryan were loud in the kitchen, music spilled from an open laptop. I watched them through the window, the way a hunter watches a prey species unaware. The first visitor that morning was a process server, a discreet man who looked bored except for the shine in his eyes when he handed papers into unsuspecting hands. He walked up the path, clipboard in hand, and I felt an electric charge that was thin as a wire. The door opened and Emma signed without reading the header. Over the course of 15 minutes she would learn to read. She read, then she looked at Ryan as if the paper might be a trick. He rolled his eyes and took the pages, eyes flicking. He thought it was a nuisance, a bureaucratic pause. He was wrong. The injunction meant the house was legally off limits. The owner of the title, me, had demanded the court enforce my rights pending review. That meant no more casual purchases, no more remodeling without consent, no more sales. Ryan barked about lawyers, about injustice, about the treachery of a man who had apparently arisen from the desert to ruin their life. He was loud and childish and cruel. He made the mistake of underestimating the network of quiet people who had helped me build the frame. Within an hour, my phone lit. James sent a terse message. Accounts frozen, 2 transfers reversed, need your direction for press release. Elena, the lawyer's assistant, had already faxed the bank a confirmed trace indicating several improper withdrawals from a joint account that didn't belong to Emma alone. The auditors were interested. Management called for statements. Panic moved through their circle like a scent. Ryan called me names that were small and petty from across the room. For a second I almost answered. Part of me longed to shout, to throw back the insult and make the final wound. But there was strategy in silence. I let him fume. I let him make himself a spectacle while the law did its slow, efficient work. In the afternoon, the journalist called. Marla asked for a meeting in the garden. They had already published an early inquiry piece, careful, factual, with a quote from a bank that nothing could be confirmed and yet another from the council about property disputes. The tone was inquisitive rather than accusatory. It was enough to start a rumor in a town that preferred certainty to gossip. People who had once politely nodded at their backyard barbecues now made phone calls. Allies hesitated. Contractors put progress on hold. The man who had proposed to me as a token of security, Ryan, found himself uninvited from the exclusive lunch he'd been promised. But the most effective part of the plan wasn't in court or the bank or the paper. It was in the private, surgical way I stripped the illusion away. I began by sending small, well-timed email copies of documents to a list. Her employer's HR, the insurance board she worked with, the neighborhood association president, a couple of developers who had been considering their partnership. The emails were bland and professional, nothing defamatory. Just facts, timestamps, copies of invoices that showed remodels charged to an account that didn't include her as an owner, payments to contractors linked to Ryan's shell companies. Facts are ruthless. Facts have no mercy. One by one, the people who allow life to flow smoothly, insurers, contractors, banks, fellow parents, put their hands up. The contractor who had agreed to install a new deck suddenly said the project had to be paused until the title was clear. The HR at Emma's office called a private meeting and asked if she had anything she needed to disclose. The next day, the regional office asked for documentation for a small corporate loan she'd applied for before the wedding wreaths and the weekends away. The world widened until every corner of her little life felt the chill of inquiry. Ryan, as the brittle man of instant reactions, tried the route of intimidation. He hired a small private investigator to dig up dirt on me. The investigator, a young man with too much bravado and too little patience, sent back a stack of social media posts and bar photos that proved nothing. I expected as much. I leaned on the man with questions, offered him a quiet choice: cooperate and move on, or have his little tricks forwarded to a county prosecutor as evidence of attempting to conceal funds. He chose to cooperate. At night, Emma sat on the steps and texted me long, frantic messages that read like a litany of regret and threats. "You'll regret this," she wrote once. "Then, I never loved you." Later, "You don't know what I'm capable of." I let them come like rain on broken glass. She called the outlet that had printed the factual inquiries and tried to spin it into a personal drama. Journalists have compassion for melodrama when it suits a narrative, but the facts we'd provided framed it as a legal and ethical issue. The paper responded with requests for documentation and disclaimers, and slowly, with the patience of a surgeon, their interest shifted from spectacle to investigation. People prefer the smell of certainty. The more we stacked, the more certainty leaned into the idea that something had been wrong. The next move was quieter and cruel in a different way. I let Emma's friends see what I had seen, not in a dramatic public reveal but in private messages. A woman from her book club received a PDF of a contractor invoice and the line item that clearly billed a purchase to Ryan's garage instead of the household account. A neighbor who once brought over pie now read an email that suggested the new couple might have legal exposure. Social ostracization is subtle. It creeps like mold, softening the trust between people who once smiled over fences. It worked. Invitations stopped arriving. Garbage bins stayed uncollected the morning their street was supposed to host a block party. Ryan complained that his clients were suddenly harder to reach. Emma called in sick to work more frequently, and when she appeared, her mascara had smudged at the corners. The legal engine churned. Weeks of paperwork turned into hearings. Depositions peeled back layers of excuses. People who had thought themselves comfortable in proximity to easy money found subpoenas at their door. The town's small talk turned to the kind of whispers that become statements in formal meetings. And then, the moment I had been waiting for, the sheriff's knock. It landed one wet morning, the kind of day that leaves the grass heavy and the sky thin. The deputy read the warrant, the one that allowed for removal of property and peaceful eviction pending adjudication. For a heartbeat, I felt a muscle twitch in my chest, surprise at how small those sounds seemed when executed quietly, and then the space was clear for the inevitable. They packed in brown boxes with the meticulousness of someone boxing up a life that had been unfastened. Ryan stood at the edges, jaw clenched, the bruises of his ego turning into anger that looked ugly on him. He would yell and accuse, lash and threat. I let him. The neighbors paused on their porches to watch this small domestic tragedy unfold like a Sunday play. Some looked at me with pity, others nodded in a hard sort of respect. Emma's face was a map of shock and shame, as the officers placed plastic seals on electrical boxes and attached chain locks to the gate. Her hands trembled as they removed the framed photos we once held as token memories, photographs with our faces in them, small and sunlit. She looked at me then, and for a second I thought the woman who once left for work with a smile might appear. There was none of that old softness left, only the bare muscles of survival, animal and raw. When they escorted them from the property, Emma raged. She screamed accusations into the wind, that I was cruel, that I had stolen her future, that I had no soul. I heard the words and let them hit me like rain. They did not bruise. I had prepared for this. I had prepared for the ugliness of being called monster. I had rehearsed shame until it meant nothing in the face of justice. There was a small victory in the way the sheriff did things legally. No violence, no spectacle beyond the natural. That kind of finality is cleaner, it leaves the moral ground less complicated. People who prefer a certain kind of righteousness can sleep better on the night the law moves correctly. But my final act, the one that burned longest, came after they were gone. I walked through the rooms of the house, touching what had been ours and had been theirs for months. The couch had a cigarette burn near the arm. Ryan had been careless. A child's cup left in haste. A lipstick on the bathroom mirror smeared. I took the items that meant something to me and placed them in a box. A thin paperback of poems I used to read in the late hours, a small silver spoon I'd bought on a trip for us, the cracked picture of the two of us at the lake long before inheritance or deceit touched us. And then, for the final symbolic blow, I opened my laptop, logged into my military benefit account and set a transfer. I directed a modest sum from the accounts I had built, the safe, quiet savings she had ignored, to a small charity that helped veterans get back on their feet. It felt like a cleansing. Money had been moved like a weapon, but now I moved it like a remedy. The act was small, almost invisible, but it mattered. I also did one thing more public and unforgiving. I compiled a single envelope and mailed it to the employer of Ryan, to the mortgage company that had loaned him money based on staged collateral, and to the county prosecutor. It contained documentation of the wire trails, photos of the illegal transfers to his shell company, the video of the dinner in which he bragged about his fast flips, the invoice trail that proved illegal appropriation of funds. Call it evidence, call it retribution. Call it whatever you like, the point was those men had made their choices, the system would now do its work. Weeks blurred, court dates were set, the bank's freeze turned into formal claims, Ryan's company was subpoenaed. Employees who had once nodded at his pull now found themselves in depositions. Emma attempted to reconstruct a story of suddenness, a narrative of a woman who had been forced to make painful choices. But truth is a stubborn rodent. When cornered, it squeaks until someone notices. I watched her suffer public humiliation the way an artist watches bad art being taken down. There was satisfaction, yes, but deeper than that was the sense that the scales had a groove now, a place they rested. My life felt less like a long walk through quicksand and more like steady footing. One morning, months later, Emma stood before a judge and read a statement of apology not for the actions that had started this disaster but to plea for leniency in the restitution she could not fully make. Her voice broke when she said, "I was selfish." The courtroom was quiet, misery a kind of humble balm. I sat in the gallery and watched, feeling a complex pull of pity and finality. When the judge sealed the restitution order, modest, not enough to heal all but enough to force repair, a weight lifted. Not because I reveled in her pain, but because the system had recognized wrong and corrected it, however slowly. The legal mechanisms moved like glaciers, patient and uncompromising. After the courtroom emptied and the fluorescence of judicial lights faded, I walked to the car and drove home to the house that was legally mine again. It felt different now. Walkways had been repaired. My neighbor, who'd once pretended not to see the small injustices, nodded at me like a man who has been obliged to take note. I unlocked the door with a key that felt like a tiny sword. Dust motes danced in the light. The echo in the hallway sounded like a space reclaimed. I stood in the middle of the living room and for the first time in a long time allowed myself to feel the shape of it. A large, ordinary room, a house that had absorbed parts of two lives and spat them out. I was not a man built for spectacle. I am not a man who wanted a monument to cruelty. I am a man who wanted what was ours secured and respect returned. I fixed a pot of tea, the kettle whistled, I let it scream for a good long minute because the sound felt like punctuation. Then I sat on the porch swing and let the wind wash the dust out of my hair. My body had shed the tightness of the months. My breathing returned to the steady cadence of someone who'd weathered storms and found land. There were consequences I had not wished for, friends who pulled away, a sister who said I'd become hard, a loneliness that felt sharper in the quiet nights. But there were also small reparations. The barista at the corner shop who remembered our wedding and asked how I was, the neighbor who mowed my lawn because he knew it had been a long season for me, the postman who laid a package of tea next to my door with a note, "For you, M." Leela, the little neighbor's child I'd watched from the porch in years before, came by one afternoon with a handmade card. "Welcome back," she said with a grin. Children see authenticity like a blade, their eyes cut through performed pain. Her smile was clean and simple, and it was enough. It was more than enough. As for Emma, I didn't gloat when she left town quietly a few months later. She found a place far away where no one knew the ledger of her life. I suppose in some ways she escaped the long hand of consequence that slowly found her. But the marks of decisions remain. Decisions are like watermarks. They show where someone has been. I returned to the lake one summer evening, the place where we had first fallen in love and first dreamed of a life with two children who never came. The water lay black and patient, a strange facsimile of time. I sat on the dock and watched a heron slice the reflection of the sky. For years I had defined myself by waiting, for orders, for return, for permission. Now I was defined by the state of standing, standing for myself, for fairness, for a kind of quiet honor that isn't printed in ribbons or shouted from balconies. Revenge was never the point. The point had always been to reclaim the small things that matter: dignity, a bed that doesn't host strangers who betray you, the right to your own name in your own house. The rest, the arrests, the restitution, the whispers, were the necessary, bruising appendages of making something right. When my phone buzzed one night, it was a number I recognized. "James." "Everything cleared," he said. "You're good." I let the phrase sit in the air like one of Margaret's letters, full of meaning beneath its plain surface. Then I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I laughed, not the harsh laugh of irony, but a single, small laugh like a man who hears a door click shut on a long chapter. I had not wanted to become the sort of man who breaks another life for the sake of correction. I had fought tooth and nail to maintain a line between justice and vengeance, but sometimes life leaves you no neat choices. It leaves you with paths and consequences, with laws and injuries. I had chosen a path that enforced consequence and tried, as best I could, to keep cruelty out of the equation. As I locked the house that night and turned the key twice, the porch light caught the shadow of my hand. It trembled for a second, then stilled. The world outside was ordinary and waiting for me to step back in. I did. I locked the door and for the first time in years allowed a tired man's peace to fold into the hollows of my chest. Later, long after the agents and the courts and the gossip had moved on to other people's narratives, I sat down and wrote one sentence in my notebook, the one I'd used the first night I read Emma's email. Understood. Then beneath it I added one more line, a private end to a long sequence. It was already too late.